For decades, humans stood on the front lines, rescuing the lost, defending the weak, and building peace across the stars. But when the galaxy turned its back and called them dangerous, Earth didn't rage. It simply walked away. What followed wasn't war, it was silence. And in that silence, the galaxy finally understood what it had lost. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up to support more powerful storytelling. Now let's move toward this wonderful story. The grand chamber of the Galactic Assembly shimmered under artificial skylights, its walls lined with the colors of 47 different species. Every seat was filled, every screen lit with the day's agenda. But the air was tense, thick with the same quiet disrespect that had settled over years of meetings. At the center, Envoy Ronan Hale stood with his hands folded behind his back. He did not raise his voice or shift his weight nervously. He had heard the outcome before the vote even began. The council president, a glassy-skinned being from the Vori delegation, stood with the practiced calm of someone used to making dismissive rulings. Its voice rang out in melodic tones, translated for the room. The request for resource rights within the Torvan system submitted by the human delegation is hereby denied. The council cites concerns regarding volatility and military unpredictability. Around the chamber there were nods from many species, a few uninterested blinks, and one or two polite shrugs. Only the human delegation remained entirely still. Behind Ronan, Commander Lena Torres sat with her fingers wrapped tightly around the arms of her chair. Her uniform looked perfect, but the fury in her eyes betrayed her control. She had lost friends, no family, on patrols defending those very systems. And now, once again, humans were being told to be quiet, to accept less, to play the role of helpful background noise in a galaxy that never gave them credit. Ronan's voice came slowly and evenly. Understood. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. That word alone caught the attention of several delegates. Beside Lena, researcher Kale Omar looked down at his notes, then back up. He had prepared a statement outlining the countless human-led relief efforts and scientific support missions across more than a dozen systems. He had charts, statistics, visuals, even recorded testimonials. But something in Ronan's silence told him not to speak yet. Another delegate spoke, this one from the Soloric species, a long-necked being with eyes that glowed dull green. We do appreciate the assistance humanity has provided in the past. However, shared benefits must be carefully managed to prevent imbalance. We hope Earth understands the need for caution. There was nothing careful about it, and Ronan knew it. For years, humanity had shown up when no one else would. They had flown into plague zones, evacuated colonies during solar flares, and patrolled the borders that the more powerful empires refused to touch. But when it came time for recognition, or inclusion, or access to something of real value, the answer was always the same. Humans were too unstable, too emotional, too unpredictable. Kyle shifted uncomfortably, but Ronan remained still. He stepped forward. Only when the president moved to the next item on the agenda, his voice still level broke through the quiet murmur. Before we continue, I would like to respond. The president paused. Responses are not customary after a ruling. I understand, Ronan replied. But then again, few customs have stopped humanity from doing what was necessary. Several heads turned. A few chuckles rippled, but unease crept into the room. Ronan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of what he represented did it for him. Over the last 25 standard years, he continued, humanity has played its part. Not because we were asked nicely, not because we were treated as equals, but because it was right. When the suns of Veros 9 went dark and refugees flooded neighboring systems, it was human freighters that rerouted cargo to bring them food. When pirates swarmed the nav line between Severa and Malkon, it was our defense fleet that held the line. When others stayed back, we stepped forward. Lena's gaze stayed locked on the chamber floor, but her knuckles were white. Kale swallowed, hard. The words were true. And in this room, truth was often the one thing no one wanted to hear. We are not asking for favors, Ronan said. We're asking for fairness. And if fairness is too much, then perhaps we need to reconsider what we give in return. The room grew very quiet. The Torvan system lies at the edge of a zone that only our ships patrol. Without us, piracy will rise. And if you believe the trade losses will be worth your pride, that is your decision. But do not ask us to bleed in silence. The president remained still. The decision officially was not changing. But Ronan hadn't come to beg for change. He had come to start one. Without waiting for permission, he turned and walked back to his seat. Lena stood. Kyle followed. One by one, the human delegates rose and began filing out, not storming, not shouting, just leaving, quietly, completely. At the doors, Ronan paused and looked back. He said nothing. The look alone was enough. For years, humanity had been the galaxy's most dependable tool, a force that responded to crisis after crisis, always hoping for acceptance. But that hope had finally run dry. And now, the silence they left behind was louder than any war cry. 3 days after the withdrawal from the council chamber, the galaxy began to feel the absence of its most reliable defenders. It started in quiet corners, regions near the edges of mapped space where patrol ships once flew regular routes and medical transports checked in on unstable colonies. Now, those areas had gone silent. No Terran fleet vessels moved through their skies. No Terran distress beacons answered when calls for help went out. The change was not sudden, but it was sharp. For decades, everyone had taken Earth's presence for granted. Their ships always arrived. Their medics always deployed. Their soldiers always stayed longer than anyone else. But now, the space where those forces once operated had grown colder, emptier. In a secure council chamber, Senator Divan of the Arxa species leaned back in his seat, his metallic skin reflecting the dim light of the holo display in front of him. "They've gone soft," he said to the room. "Earth is emotional. They'll come back once the dust settles." His voice held confidence, but not everyone shared his ease. The expression on First Marshal Solon, a veteran of 100 border skirmishes, was much darker. "You're wrong," he replied flatly. "They didn't leave in anger. They left in silence. That's far worse." Solon had served beside Terran Marines during the Hive incursions. He had seen what they were willing to endure, not because they were ordered to, but because they believed it mattered. To see them walk away without a single demand, that unsettled him more than any threat of war. Meanwhile, on the southern orbital platform above Earth, Commander Lena Torres oversaw the final rerouting of the last remaining defense patrols. Dozens of ships, once assigned to galactic peacekeeping, were now regrouping under a new directive: serve Earth first, protect human colonies, train for human missions. Her crew didn't cheer or complain, they just worked. These were soldiers who had lost friends on missions that never made headlines. Now they were being told their sacrifices mattered. That was enough. In the civilian zones, researcher Kale Omar sat before a panel of scientific advisors from different species. They had invited him to speak about his team's advances in atmospheric stabilization tech, but he barely got through the introduction before one of the delegates cut him off. "Why has your team suspended cooperation with our research labs?" the Velmari representative asked sharply. Kale looked up, his eyes calm but firm. "Because our people aren't being treated like partners, just like tools." The Velmari hissed in frustration. "That's emotional thinking." Kale didn't raise his voice. "No," he said, "it's a boundary. The news spreads quickly. In just 1 week, a dozen trade ships are lost to raiders near the edge of the Torvan corridor, an area previously guarded by Terran patrols. No backup arrives. The colonies there begin sending emergency transmissions to the council. Some are intercepted, others are lost. A shaky voice crackles over an open channel. "Where are the humans?" Inside the council chamber, emergency meetings are held. Voices rise, fingers point. Accusations fill the air. Solon stands again, addressing the assembly. "You depended on their loyalty," he says. "You leaned on their silence, And now, you realize how much of your safety rested on them simply showing up. Senator Diven waves a hand. This is politics, they're just trying to gain leverage. No, Solon says again. They're tired. Back on Earth, Ronan Hale watches the broadcasts without satisfaction. He didn't want the galaxy to suffer. He wanted them to understand. And suffering, unfortunately, was often the only language that power recognized. For years, humanity had followed the rules, waited patiently, taken the smaller seat at the table. All they'd asked was to be treated like equals. When that didn't happen, they didn't rage, they didn't threaten, they just stopped carrying the weight. In a small control room aboard the Earth flagship Verity, Lena listens to an incoming call from a colony on the edge of the Severa system. They're pleading for help. Pirates have begun targeting supply lines and several outposts are already abandoned. Her officer looks at her. Do we respond? Lena thinks for a moment, then asks a question. Did they vote with us or against us in the last council session? The officer checks. Against. Lena nods slowly. Then forward the call to their own sector fleet. Let them handle it. It's not personal. It's policy. A new one. This is not vengeance. It's a quiet correction. A rebalancing. Kyle Omar continues his research but now shares breakthroughs only with species that supported Earth's call for fair treatment. He doesn't block knowledge. He simply protects the direction it flows. When asked by a journalist why the Terrans are becoming more selective, he replies softly, "You can only give so much before you begin to lose yourself. We're not withdrawing. We're remembering who we are." The measure of loyalty was never about orders followed. It was about the sacrifices made when no one asked. And now, with the silence left behind, the galaxy was beginning to understand just how much loyalty it had never earned. The stars did not change, but the space between them had grown colder. In the weeks following humanity's quiet retreat, from galactic operations, the effects began to ripple across every corner of the known systems. At first, many believed things would simply adjust. Other fleets would fill the gaps. Other scientists would step forward. But what followed was not a smooth transition. It was silence. The kind of silence that arrives after a familiar voice goes quiet. Trade ships that once sailed confidently along distant routes now traveled in escorted clusters, often arriving late or not at all. Piracy surged along the outer lanes. Medical requests from fringe colonies piled up in council channels unanswered. Coordinated relief efforts stalled as smaller species waited for the humans who were no longer coming. A recording surfaced across the interstellar net. A raw, uncut feed from a freighter in the Orvis sector under attack by raiders. The pilot's voice was trembling but steady. "If anyone can hear this, please respond. We've lost power. Shields down. There are wounded on board. We just need time. Please. Is Earth listening?" The recording ended with static. "No." Response came. The transmission spread fast, replayed across networks shared with growing discomfort. For decades, the answer would have come in minutes. A Terran vessel, a search ship, a defense wing. But now, just echoes in the void. On a quiet orbiting platform above a neutral colony, First Marshal Solon reviewed a map filled with red markers, zones once protected by human patrols. The markers blinked slowly, reminders of responsibility now left unattended. He'd seen war. He had stood side by side with human squads during the Hive incursions. He had watched them hold lines that others fled. Their loyalty had never needed speeches. They simply showed up. And now they were gone. In a meeting that morning, Solon had urged the Council to reopen negotiations with Earth. He had been dismissed with a wave and a polite nod. They'll return when it suits them, someone had said. But Solon wasn't so sure. He knew the difference between anger and exhaustion. What he saw in the human withdrawal was finality. Back on Earth, the halls of the Terran Assembly buzzed with quiet purpose. There were no parades, no celebrations, just planning. The shift in strategy was not about punishment, it was about direction. Commander Lena Torres walked through the naval command deck, checking the readiness of ships now being reassigned to protect human colonies and allied worlds. She paused as she passed a large screen showing the same freighter footage from Orvas. Her jaw tightened. She remembered that voice. That kind of desperation. She had heard it too many times out in the field, too often from species who later voted against even the most basic human rights in council chambers. That era, she decided, was over. In a shared lab beneath the surface of New Terra, Kyle Omar looked through medical data from recent outbreaks on fringe settlements. His team had developed a treatment that could save lives. But the request came from a world whose leadership had publicly called Earth a liability to stability. He stared at the screen, his hand hovering over the response button. Then, quietly, he redirected the data to a closer facility that could help. With a note attached, "Please request future collaboration through proper channels. Earth no longer provides default support." The message was clear. The galaxy was welcome to ask, but they would have to ask with respect. More distress calls came, some from new allies, some from familiar enemies. The Terran Assembly responded only to those who had stood with them during the vote, or who had since come forward to renegotiate in good faith. For the others, Earth's silence spoke louder than any weapon. Inside the council chamber, tension grew. The chair delegate from the Venari system, once firm in their refusal to grant Earth trade permissions, now demanded to know why their ships were being lost on once safe routes. A younger ambassador from the Surreal Coalition asked where the promised support ships were for a joint expedition. The council president, struggling to hold the room, finally admitted, "We did not expect this kind of vacuum." In his private office, Ronan Hale watched the debate unfold on a screen. He leaned back in his chair, a quiet weight behind his gaze. The human delegation had not sent threats. They had not staged protests. They had simply stepped away, taking with them the unseen support that had made galactic order possible. That support had never come with conditions, only with faith. And now, that faith had been broken. Later that evening, a courier ship arrived at the Earth Embassy from a small border world. A simple message was delivered. "We didn't understand before. Now we do. Please, talk with us." Ronan read the note, folded it carefully, and slid it into a drawer. In the silence left by human absence, the galaxy had discovered what their presence truly meant. And in that silence, echoes of regret, recognition, and realization began to grow. It was not a war. It was a lesson. And for once, Earth wasn't the one doing the listening. The sky above the trade world of Kelvaris burned orange as emergency beacons flickered weakly through the thick atmosphere. A merchant hub once bustling with traffic now sat broken, half its defense grid offline, its orbital stations scarred by sudden pirate strikes. Ships that had docked in peace now scrambled to escape. Cries for assistance echoed through every channel. Yet across the void, no Terran ships came. They had already left, called home to protect their own. The Terran fleet had always been the first to arrive in crisis. Now they were simply absent, and the galaxy was beginning to understand what it meant to operate without them. At the center of the collapsed grid, Commander Zarin of the Kelvar Defense Council stood amid a flickering holomap, watching red alerts multiply. Her voice, firm but weary, gave out new orders to local patrol ships already stretched too thin. In her mind, the truth repeated like a quiet echo. They should have supported the humans when it mattered. She had sat in the chamber when Earth made its final appeal, and like many others, she had remained silent. It wasn't personal, she'd told herself, just politics. But now her people were paying for that silence. They had relied on the stability Earth provided, mistaking it for something permanent. And without that stability, everything was unraveling. Elsewhere, in the safety of a neutral observatory on Azarin's moon, First Marshal Solon reviewed the growing list of frontier systems, suffering from unhandled emergencies. His jaw tightened with every name he recognized. Colonies he had once visited, routes he had helped secure alongside Terran fleets. He had warned the Council, not out of fear, but because he respected what the Terrans had done for the galaxy without ever demanding glory. Now those same delegates were scrambling to draft rescue bills, desperate to form new coalitions. But without Earth's involvement, coordination faltered. Arguments broke out, Delays mounted. Resources vanished en route. No one could agree. Who should lead? Who should fund? Who should sacrifice? On Earth, the response was quiet but clear. The Terran Assembly did not gloat. There were no parades, no victory speeches. Their fleets trained. Their scientists worked. Their diplomats received messages, apologies, requests, desperate invitations to return. Commander Lena Torres reviewed each one with cool detachment. She remembered every dismissive voice, every vote against humanity's status, every insult veiled in diplomacy. Now those same voices begged for help. She did not hate them. She simply didn't trust them anymore. Her message to the assembly was direct. We help where we are respected, not just where we are needed. Kyle Omar stood in a broadcast chamber, below Earth's capital, preparing to address a coalition of allied scientists. He looked tired but certain. His words were broadcast across the inner systems. For generations, humanity gave without limit. We sent medics into plague zones, we sent patrols into dangerous sectors, we gave technology, we gave time, we gave lives. And we were told we were too reckless, too emotional, too much. So we stepped back, not to punish but to survive. His voice remained steady. If you want our help now, you must understand something simple. It's not free anymore. Respect is the price. Across the galaxy, the lesson sank deeper. Refugee stations once stabilized by Terran engineers now suffered system failures. Trade networks held together by Terran patrols crumbled. And in the empty corridors of the Galactic Council, arguments turned to regret. For too long, they had built policy on the assumption that Earth would always be there, that humans, for all their unpredictability, would show up when no one else would. They called them unstable, but it had been Earth that anchored the chaos. In time, envoys began arriving in Terran space, not with demands but with humility. Delegates from the Kelvar, the Sealor, even the Arxa, whose voices had once carried disdain, now asked only for conversation. In one such meeting, Ronan Hale sat across from a once proud ambassador who now spoke in a quiet tone. We didn't understand what you meant to the galaxy. We assumed you needed us more than we needed you. Ronan didn't reply with anger. He simply said, we never needed permission to help, but we're not here to be used. The terms were different now. Equal partnerships, transparent agreements, mutual responsibility. Humanity would still help, but not as tools, as allies. And not for those who only valued them in crisis. The Terran fleet returned slowly but with purpose. Their banners no longer flew under council authority but under their own. They arrived in places where old friendships had been rekindled, where respect had been restored. And where they did not return, others filled the silence with memory and hesitation. In time, the galaxy healed, but it never forgot. The age of taking Earth for granted had ended. What followed was not an age of dominance, but balance. A galaxy without anchors had drifted too long, and it was only when the humans stopped trying to hold everything together that the rest finally learned to hold their own weight. Above Earth, in the stillness of orbit, Lena Torres stood by a viewport watching the stars. A new signal flashed from the border systems, a call for aid, respectful and clear. She nodded once. This one, she said quietly. We answer. And humanity moved not because it had to, but because it chose to.